more things change, the more things stay the same. Hey guys, welcome back. This is Grown and Healthy, the channel where we explore self-improvement through movement. Chinese foot binding was an ancient Chinese custom of tightly binding the feet of young girls in order to change their shape and size. Feet altered by foot binding were known as lotus feet, and the shoes made for these feet were known as lotus shoes. In late imperial China, bound feet were considered a status symbol and a mark of feminine beauty. However, foot binding was a painful practice that limited the mobility of women and resulted in lifelong disabilities. The prevalence and practice of foot binding varied over time and by region. It started first amongst the upper class and eventually permeated all classes. In some areas, foot binding was seen as raising one's marriage prospects. It was not until the early 20th century that the practice began to die out, following the efforts of anti-foot binding campaigns. The last official new cases were in the 1950s, and by 2007, only a small handful of elderly Chinese women whose feet had been bound were still alive. Now, while it was popular and held in high regard during its heyday, you would think in the present day, the idea to disfigure and immobilize a person for the sake of tradition, status, clout would be considered barbaric, cruel, and definitely archaic. After all, we're no longer in the Dark Ages. We are now science-based, but it would seem that we selectively choose which science works best with our confirmed biases. And in this video, I'll show you how the practice of Chinese foot binding never ended. It just transitioned and went global.
Present day. Present time.
Nothing says high society like impracticality. Whether it is the idea of wearing a $100,000 watch to tell the time, an exotic 800 horsepower car to drive to the gym, or even wearing a pair of stilts for a night out of dancing. Footwear from its inception was an object of distinction. It was used to tell the elite from the barefooted rabble. In the history of heeled footwear, we see this theme playing out again and again, from the opulence in the European Renaissance, where it was worn by both men and women as a symbol of status and power. The height of the heel often indicated one's social standing. And then, as things changed, the heels lowered during the Industrial Revolution, where more men became involved in various industries and manual labor. Practicality became essential. And once again, we see a change, because once the commoners adopted the high heel, high society needed a greater extreme of separation, popularizing the stiletto heel as a rejection of utility styles. Because utility is for people who have to work. Now, let's take a closer look at the form of the bounded foot. You'll notice how the flexible, more elastic portion of the forefoot is wrapped around and under the sole, creating a narrow pointed forefoot. And look how the wrapped toes cause a plantar flexion of the ankle and an appearance of the elevation of the overall foot. When you look at foot binding and high heels side by side, you see that foot binding is just a precursor to the high heel of today. We see the same underlying form, the appearance of being taller, the pointed forefoot, and the elevated heel shape. Only that we now use hardware to create the form, instead of molding the foot itself into the form. In the modern era, we use technology, and with advances in materials, heels have become higher and thinner. 6-inch high heels, a pointed toe so narrow that it looks like the tip of an arrow. Is there really any difference? Nope, just the methods and technology. In the end, they are both giving the same result. And they're both being done for the same reasons. Foot binding in China alluded to being a member of high society and being seen as more desirable for marriage. We see the same implied high status of wearing high heels being propagated by designer brands, Hollywood, and fashion journals as the look to have, being pushed by high society as an ideal, as a signifier of being part of the leisure class. It's amazing that high fashion trumps comfort In regards to the stiletto heel, they're too painful to even wear longer than 2 hours. But the damage is worsened when you understand that most women buy shoes a size smaller than their actual size. How frequently do we see the group of women with heels in their hands after a night out, walking barefoot on the street, or finding an alternative shoe in their trunk? And we see the high heel not only in dress shoes, we're wearing expensive, albeit cheaply made, sneakers, solely based on popularity with a disregard to how they're ruining our feet. Balenciaga, an ultra-luxury brand, categorizes this shoe as athletic footwear. Athletics, bound for glory. Have you seen athletes' feet? They're horrendous. I mean, in the future, if these shoe companies have their way, their endorsement contracts will require athletes to wear shoes at all times. Their feet are highly disfigured with a myriad of issues: bruising, flat feet, corns, calluses, and bunions. And you may think that this is from their strenuous work and high impact from the sport. But if you look at a wide variety of sports and the feet of these athletes, we see the same aspects of disfigurement. Now ask yourself, how can the feet of different sport disciplines share the same aspects of disfigurement? What do these feet all share? Oh, that's simple. It's got to be the shoes. With these telltale signs, we definitely see the connection. Issues like the adduction of the big toe, so great that it pushes the second toe upwards between the first and third. This is evident of a tapered forefoot. And nowhere on earth is there an individual born with a tapered toe box. Any bunching of the toes is a result of disfigurement through the accommodation of the shape of the shoe.
What happens on the inside of the foot for your foot to look like that is if you're wearing too much pressure on the front of your foot, the pressure will make the foot bone of your big toe roll out and your big toe roll in, which creates that angle that pushes your shoes in and deforms them. That's because your toe actually becomes deformed in the bone.
And this disfigurement can become permanent and debilitating. A great example is Deion Sanders, who recently had 2 of his toes removed. What was initially diagnosed as turf toe later became more complicated, with blood clots and the risk of losing his whole foot.
That really took.
I had 3 surgeries for that.
But it was a turf toe, wasn't it?
Turf toe, yeah. That's what started everything.
Yeah.
Let's look at the state of his feet. What shape do you see outlined by his feet? In this clip, you see that he is wearing the same style of shoe that has caused his problems. We see the common tapered toe box joining and overlapping the toes to a center point. The outer sole of cleats are often hard plastic or metal and molded with an imposed toe spring combined with a tapered toe box. This combination is absolutely brutal. Your fascia conforms to this immovable mold. It becomes hardwired to function within the constraints, leaving the joints susceptible to injury. You see, high-load forces of ballistic movement have no room to be absorbed by the foot once wearing these shoes. As a person lands on a bare foot, it expands upon impact, loading and deloading with the pressure. The foot needs the ability to extend and flex the toes as much as possible, and it is important that they stay in their natural alignment. You see, this is the cause of turf toe. If you do not have the ability to flex your toes, you will leave the ball of your foot, the MTP joint, exposed without the function of contraction of the big toe. That means the big toe is unable to grip the ground and provide coverage and support for this joint. And no one's big toe can overcome the stiffness of a hard plastic or metal outsole. And you're adding toe spring, which cannot be flexed. And think about the effect of impact over the years and hours of practice playing the game. Stuck in this compromised position, even with a slight toe spring, the ball of the foot is exposed to the ground without any protection. When you are constantly pressing the foot down through the act of running, you are hitting the front side of the ball of the foot. It's necessary to have this protection from the big toe in order not to jam backwards into the ankle. And that's where turf toe comes from. The toe spring taking away the protection for the ball of the foot as you're running or kicking or doing anything while wearing cleats. You see, when you press the foot down, normally with pressure, the big toe creates an arch to the ball of the big toe, providing protection and suspension, right? So you can press into it and still have the suspension mechanism enacted, just as similar to the medial arch. Now, you provide toe spring arbitrarily, and you take that away from this soft and fragile area. And now only it is left alone to hit the ground. Eventually, this becomes turf toe. Now, I know you'll say that not every athlete has had their toes amputated, but understand everyone has different levels of tolerance, but all have the indicative toe box shape and subsequent complications and pain from wearing this footwear. And we're talking about sports that don't even involve direct contact with the ball. Imagine having feet that are constantly in pain and injured without even kicking a ball. And it's funny because most soccer superstars that come from developing nations actually grew up playing football barefooted. So the constraints of soccer cleats are still unnecessary. In fact, a few years ago, right here on YouTube, I saw a video about a football boot startup considered having a wide toe box and flexible sole. I think it has great potential, and I think it could lead to greater performance and less injury. Keeping your foot in its natural alignment is the true key to foot health and performance, especially when we're talking about the big toe. It is the thumb of the foot in placement and significance to the function of your foot. Think of how a frozen and adducted thumb would limit your ability to throw and catch, and understand how debilitating that would be for your feet. Ankle sprains, common amongst most athletes, are inevitable without the kickstand functional support of your big toe. The functionality of your foot and ankle have lost a huge column of support. Cleats and an adducted big toe weaken your foot's performance, meaning the shoes may have been an actual limiter to their true greatness. But they won't sell many shoes if they told you that. The science, funding in a bind. The experts pride themselves on being science-based, yet the medical journals are replete with data stating that these shoes are malforming our feet and inhibiting our function from as early as the 1800s. We are talking the highest level of evolutionary design when we're speaking about the feet, and disabling them by forcing our feet into stiff, elevated coffins severs the connection that we should be making with the ground. Yet podiatrists, the people who have taken an oath towards maintaining your health, have almost a reflexive avoidance of any of this research. They have allowed Big Shoe to steamroll this garbage to the masses without any pushback. In fact, if you look at the podiatrists' channels on social media, you'll see that they recommend the same debilitating shoes, the ones that have caused all the problems. They recommend stiff-soled shoes for issues like plantar fasciitis, when actually you need a flexible sole. And they recommend pointed shoes for flat feet, which causes abduction of the big toe, ruining balance. And other practitioners that are in the rehab and postural alignment field are just as bad. They're claiming to fix imbalances with your psoas and your hip flexors, but they're focused on the asymmetry of the diaphragm, while disregarding the asymmetry of the posterior and anterior portions of the anatomy when wearing heeled footwear. In fact, most of these professionals wear the same shoes that are causing your problems, while claiming to tell you how to fix yours, which stem all from a change of your center of gravity, which is what happens when you're wearing heel shoes. And not just high heels, but any elevated heel. Studies have shown that when wearing even a 1-inch heel, the weight pressure on the ball of the foot is 22% above a natural stance. A zero-drop level field. A 2-inch heel is 57%. And a 3¼ inch heel is a staggering 76% above normal. This shift in height causes a rise in potential energy. The most stable stance for a person is one that minimizes their potential energy. So as heel height increases, stability decreases. This impacts your balance, forcing your body to tighten, mainly at the psoas and hip flexors, but also including the low back, glutes, hamstrings, calves, and Achilles tendon. They also tighten to adjust for the imbalance. So any exercise that they give you, which is usually ones that are lying on your back and off of your feet, coincidentally, are only a temporary panacea. The problem will return in the future once you put the shoes on, because posture is determined by your anatomical balance. I find it disconcerting that podiatrists of all people have not blown the whistle on the danger of these shoes, that bunions are correlated to narrow shoes. But if you take a look at this watermelon, and then look at this cubed watermelon, do I need to provide you citations as to why the watermelon has developed a cube shape? Same with the practices such as neck lengthening and corset usage. And while the supposed medical experts are quick to call out the dangers of waist trainers, they don't even blink an eye at a far more dangerous item that is ruining the majority of our feet. Is this because most of their income is derived from treating the same problems these shoes cause? Maybe this is similar to dentists who make most of their money from treating avoidable habits, such as eating highly processed foods and mouth breathing. But in our culture, we hyper-focus on teeth, while many absolutely disregard their feet, preferring to cloak them at all times. We have been programmed to disdain its bare appearance. People wear their shoes even in their house and while lying in their bed. And if they aren't wearing shoes, they're wearing socks, which are also a problem. And they'll wear socks even while sleeping. This is all status-driven. Nothing about this is natural. And comfort is at the bottom of the list of features. Walk into anybody's house barefoot and just watch how they glare. I'm always in awe at the intrigue of onlookers when they see me wearing my Vibram 5 fingers. They're like deer peering into high beams. This culture has created such a twisted view of our feet that we look at a glove for the feet as being weird. But walking on a narrow marshmallow is cool. And while there are hazards and grime on the streets, you'll pick up the same grime with your shoes and track that inside your house. The nubs of shoes carry dirt and grime like a magnet. I think how we are born is mechanically as beautiful and developed as we need to be, and that there is no reason to misalign or malform our body. Definitely not for the approval of another individual or society. And what we should be doing is throwing away all these cultural indoctrinations and revisit what is truly healthy. I advocate walking barefoot as much as possible. Also, reclaiming the space between your toes to improve your dexterity and balance. You'll find toe spreaders on my website, grownliving.com, that will give your toes the freedom that you were born with. If you're wearing shoes, wear shoes that are built around the shape and capabilities of your feet, commonly called barefoot shoes. These should be lightweight, flexible, and foot-shaped, with no support, neither the heel, arch, or the toes. I see that people like to wedge, pun intended, shoes like Hoka into the barefoot shoe options, but stiff soles and toe spring are not a barefoot shoe. And lastly, change the way that you walk. The common heel strike walk is the result of an adaptation to wearing heeled footwear and is as much a cause of tightness, imbalance, and pain as the shoes themselves. You can see this in people who are transitioning as they try to walk as if they had a heel, and when they find out that there is none to rely on, they are immediately in pain. It shows how ingrained our patterns are, but they can be changed for the better. By adopting a forefoot strike, you can provide your foot with greater mobility and with a balanced impact, no longer jutting and hurting the calcaneus bone. This has been Grown and Healthy, the channel where we explore self-improvement through movement. Thanks for watching.